Hi friends, my name is Brooke and I want to thank you for joining me to practice some math today. Today we are working on solving multi-step equations. So we have this special phrase that we can use to help us to remember what steps to do in what order. You might remember back to when we were working on order of operations that we used the phrase, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally," as a checklist to remind us what to do. So this is similar. We've got a new phrase that will remind us what to do when we see multi-step equations. And our phrase is kind of silly, but it says, "Don't call me after midnight." The first letters remind us of all of the steps that we will do. So the D reminds us to distribute first. So we'll talk about all of these steps as we go, but we will know that we need to distribute when we see parentheses in our problems. C stands for combine like terms. So combining like terms is when we see terms that look alike, which means they have the same variable and the same exponent. We will know that we will be able to combine those. You have practiced that before towards the end of Math Foundations in Unit 4 of Math Foundations. The M stands for move the variable. So we will practice those. Those will be problems that have variables on both sides of the equal sign. So we'll, of course, discuss these steps as we see all of the different types of problems. But one thing to know is that these last two steps are steps that you are already familiar with. We know from Math Foundations, when you were working on two-step equations, that we always undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So you'll notice that these steps towards the top are new to us, but these last two steps are familiar from Math Foundations. So we will practice lots of problems together. You'll see these from start to finish, and I promise you, you will be able to get the hang of them. These are very tough when you first see them, but practice makes perfect. Just do your best. So here's our first page. I am going to skip through our directions here. We will work through them, through some problems from start to finish, but as you are working on your own, if you get stuck, it might help you to go back and read these. All right, so here is number 1. Every time I see these problems, I'm thinking through my steps as a checklist. So first I think of the phrase, "Don't call me after midnight." And of course, if another language is more familiar for you, feel free to come up with your own phrase that will help you to remember the steps in order. D stands for distribute. In this problem, I do not see parentheses, so I do not need to distribute. C stands for combine like terms. So in this problem, I do see like terms that I can put together. When we combine like terms, we must see parts that have the same variable and the same exponent, and they also must be on the same side of the equal sign. So looking at the left side of our equal sign, I do see some pieces that match. 4m and 4m look alike, so I can go ahead and add those together, and that gives me 8m. So 8m is equal to -24. So now our problem is just a one-step equation, and you have practiced lots of one-step equations before. We see multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division, so I must divide both sides by 8. Now I've got m all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 24 divided by 8 gives us 3. And since we have different signs, we do get -3 as our final answer. Let's try out number 2. So looking at number 2, I'm still thinking through my steps. we can use the phrase, don't call me after midnight to help us. We know that D stands for distribute, and I don't see parentheses in my problem. So that's how I know that I do not need to distribute. C does stand for combine like terms. So to combine like terms, we must look at each side of the equation individually. And looking at the left side, I do see two pieces that look alike. I have 4v minus 3v. So thinking through that, 4 minus 3 just gives me 1. So it's like an invisible 1, v, is equal to 6. This problem is actually all done. Our goal is just to get the variable all by itself on one side and then a number on the other. So v equals 6 is my final answer for number 2. Let's try out number 3 together. So again, I'm reminding myself, don't call me after midnight. That phrase helps me to remember the steps in order, where D stands for distribute. Again, I do not see any parentheses in my problem, so that's how I know I don't need to distribute. C does stand for combine like terms. Looking at the left side of the equal sign, I do see some pieces that look alike. I see a B and I see a negative 5b. Those look alike because they have the same variable. So I can think of this as 1, because it's an invisible 1, minus 5. 1 minus 5 gives us negative 4, so I can write negative 4b minus 8 is equal to 12. So now that I have combined like terms, I notice that I'm down to a two-step equation, and we have practiced those before. I see multiplication because I see a number right next to a variable, so that means multiplication, and I see subtraction. So we talked about how addition and subtraction, we undo those before we undo multiplication and division. And we remember that from the end of Math Foundations. So I need to cancel out the subtraction first by adding 8 to both sides of the equation. So plus 8 here and plus 8 here. Now I've got negative 4b by itself on the left, and on the right, 12 plus 8 gives us 20. So now I see multiplication. That's all that's left. To cancel out multiplication, we divide. We need to divide both sides by negative 4. Now we've got b all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 20 divided by 4 gives us 5. And since they have different signs, we do get an answer of negative 5. Here is number 4. Always thinking through our steps. We use that phrase to help us remember, don't call me after midnight. And the D stands for distribute. I do not see parentheses in this problem, so I do not need to distribute. But I do see that I can combine like terms. On the left side of the equal sign, I see some terms that look alike. We've got an 8 and a negative 5. I am making sure to include those signs in front of the integers. So I can combine 8 minus 5 to give me 3. So now I've got 3 plus 3x equals negative 3. I can continue to solve, and I notice that we're down to a two-step equation. We know these pretty well. We see addition. It looks like we're adding 3 next to the term that has our variable. We also see multiplication. We see a number right next to a letter, so that means multiplication. I know that I should undo addition and subtraction before I undo multiplication and division. So I need to cancel out this addition by subtracting 3 from both sides. Now I've got 3x by itself on the left side, and on the right side, negative 3 minus 3 gives us negative 6. The very last step to solve for x is to divide. We see multiplication, so we know that we should do the opposite to both sides. The opposite of multiplication is division. So now we have x all by itself on the left side, and on the right side we have 6 divided by 3, which gives us 2. They have different signs, so we do get a negative 2 as our final answer. Here's the next page. So this video will include all of the problems from this lesson, but please remember that you're always welcome to pause the video and try some out on your own when you start feeling more confident. But here's number 5. We will always use the same phrase to remember the steps. So we can say, don't call me after midnight, to remind us what to do. The D stands for distribute, and we'll know to distribute when we see parentheses in our problem. C stands for combine like terms. In this problem, I do see that we can combine like terms on the left side. Both of these have an R in them, so I just need to think about 4 minus 5. You can also think about 4 plus negative 5. So we are adding integers that have different signs, so we say different signs subtract. 5 minus 4 gives us 1, and then our higher absolute value had a negative sign, so we do get a negative 1. When we write it, we can make that 1 invisible. So this is like negative invisible 1 r is equal to 6. We still want to get the r all by itself without anything in front of it. So I need to cancel out this negative sign. So do remember that it's an invisible 1 next to the r. So this is like saying multiplication because it's negative 1 times r. Since it's multiplication, we can do the opposite to both sides. We can divide both sides by negative 1. So now I have r all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 6 divided by 1 gives us 6. But since they have different signs, we do get a negative 6. So the final answer is r equals negative 6. Here is number 6. We are still thinking through those same steps, don't call me after midnight, where D stands for distribute. We do not see parentheses in this problem, so we do not need to distribute. We do see that we can combine like terms on the left side. I see pieces that look alike because I see negative 6v and negative 3v. So when I combine those together, I should be doing negative 6 plus negative 3. These have the same signs, so we add the numbers together. 6 plus 3 gives us 9. And they were both negative, so we do get a negative 9 for our answer. We can write negative 9v plus 1 equals negative 8. Now we are down to our two-step equation. We see multiplication because we see an integer right next to a variable, and we also see addition. We know that we should undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So I want to cancel out this addition by doing the opposite. I need to subtract 1 from both sides of the equal sign. So now I have negative 9v by itself on the left side, and on the right side, negative 8 minus 1 gives us negative 9. The very last step to solve for v is to divide. We see multiplication, so we need to do the opposite. We need to divide both sides by negative 9. So now I've got v all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, negative 9 divided by negative 9 gives us a final answer of 1. Here is number 7. So we are finally starting to see those parentheses in our problems. So when we think about don't call me after midnight, the D stands for distribute. We talked about how we know to distribute when we see parentheses. So since I see parentheses in this problem, I should start by distributing. If you took Math Foundations, we practiced distributing in Unit 4 towards the end of the book, so this might look familiar to you. When we distribute, we take the number that's on the outside of the parentheses, and we multiply it times both parts inside the parentheses. So we're doing negative 8 times v, and then we will do negative 8 times negative 8. Negative 8 times v is negative 8v. Negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. 8 times 8 is 64, and since they have the same signs, we get a positive answer. So now I just copy down the rest of the problem, and now that I have distributed, I see that it looks like a two-step equation back from Math Foundations. So we know to undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So I should cancel out this addition first by subtracting 64 from both sides. Now I've got negative 8v by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 120 minus 64 gives us 56. The very last step to solve for v is to divide. We see the 8 right next to the v, so that's telling us multiplication, and we need to do the opposite. We need to divide both sides by negative 8. Now we have v all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 56 divided by 8 gives us 7. And since they have different signs, we do get a negative 7. So final answer, v equals negative 7. Here is number 8. So as we practice, we think through our steps. We know don't call me after midnight, where the D stands for distribute. So we will start by distributing 3 times 7, and then we will do 3 times negative 8. 3 times 7 gives us 21. 3 times negative 8 gives us negative 24. 3 times 8 was 24, and then since they have different signs and we're multiplying, we do get a negative answer. So that's how we got our negative 24x. We copy down the rest of the problem, so we've got equals 93. We are down to a two-step equation. This term is like we're adding on 21 next to the term with the variable. So it is a two-step equation. This is addition. This is multiplication because we see a number right next to a letter. We know that we should undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So we should cancel out this 21 by subtracting 21 from both sides. Now we've got negative 24x on the left side, and on the right side, 93 minus 21 gives us 72. The very last step is to divide. we see multiplication because we see a number right next to a variable. The opposite of multiplication is division. So we divide both sides by negative 24. Now we've got x all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 72 divided by 24 is 3. These have different signs, so we do get a negative 3 as our final answer. Here is number 9. Let's think through our steps using the phrase, "Don't call me," after midnight, where the D means to distribute. In this problem, I do see parentheses, so I do need to distribute in this problem. I'm going to take negative 4 times 1, and I will do negative 4 times 6. Negative 4 times 1 gives us negative 4. Negative 4 times 6 is negative 24. 4 times 6 was 24, and since they have different signs and we're multiplying, we do get a negative 24. So I can write negative 24x. I'm going to copy down the rest of the problem and then continue to solve. So the last steps we see negative 4, which is kind of like subtraction, and we also see multiplication because we see a number right next to a variable. We know that our order of steps tells us to undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So I need to undo this subtraction by adding 4 to both sides. So now I have negative 24x on the left side. And then on the right side, this part is tricky. We have negative 148 plus 4. So let's think through that part. Negative 148 plus 4. They have different signs, so we should subtract the numbers. 148 minus 4 gives us 144. And then our higher integer was negative, so we do get a negative answer. Negative 148 plus 4 gives us negative 144. The last step, we see multiplication, so we need to do the opposite to both sides. We're going to divide both sides by negative 24. So now we have x all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, negative 144 divided by negative 24 gives us a final answer of 6. This one you could probably use a calculator. 144 divided by 24 does give us 6, and since they have the same signs, we get a positive answer. Let's try out number 10. So as we see this one, remind yourself of the steps. Don't call me after midnight. And we know that the D stands for distribute. I do see parentheses in this problem, so I should start by distributing. I'm going to take 8 times negative 8, and that gives me negative 64m. 8 times 8 is 64, and since they had different signs, I do get a negative 64. Next up, 8 times 4 is 32. Now I can just copy down everything around it and continue to solve. So I need a negative m over here and my plus sign. So now that I've distributed, I'm going to look for our next step. C stands for combine like terms, and I do see some pieces that look alike. I've got a negative m and a negative 64m. So when I think through this is like an invisible 1, so I'm really doing negative 1 plus negative 64. These have the same signs, so I add the numbers together. 1 plus 64 is 65. And since they're both negative, it's going to be a negative 65. So negative 65m plus 32 is equal to negative 163. Now I'm down to a two-step equation. I see multiplication and I see addition. I know that I should undo addition and subtraction before I undo multiplication and division. So I'm going to cancel out this addition by doing the opposite on both sides. I'm going to subtract 32 from both sides of the equal sign. Now I've got negative 65m here on the left side, and on the right side, negative 163 minus 32. We can think of this as an addition problem. We can say keep, change, change. Keep the negative 163, change from a minus to a plus, and change from a positive 32 to a negative 32. Now I see that I'm adding integers that have the same signs, so I can add them together. 163 plus 32 gives us 195. You can think of it and say that since they're both negative, we get a negative answer. Or I like to think in addition. I always like to go to our higher absolute value for the sign. Either way, doesn't matter the way you thought of it, but our final answer should be a negative 195. Here's our very last step. We see multiplication because we see a number right next to a variable, so we know that we should do the opposite. We are going to divide both sides by negative 65. Now I've got m all by itself on the left, and on the right, 195 divided by 65 gives us 3. And since they both have the same signs, it does stay positive. So m is equal to 3. Here is number 11. So we will remember to use that phrase, "Don't call me after midnight," to remind us of the steps. We know that we should always start by distributing. I do see parentheses, so I should take my negative 8 times 8b, and then I'll also do negative 8 times 7. Negative 8 times 8 is negative 64. 8 times 8 was 64, and then we saw different signs, so we do get a negative answer. We can write negative 64b, and then I'll do negative 8 times 7. Negative 8 times 7 is negative 56. Then I will copy down the rest of the problem. So I'm copying equals 200. We are down to our last two steps. We see multiplication because we see a number right next to a letter, and that means multiplication. We also see subtraction. We have talked about how we undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So we cancel out the subtraction first by adding 56 to both sides of the equal sign. Now we have negative 64b here by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 200 plus 56 is 256. The last step is to divide. We see multiplication, so we can divide by 64 on both sides. So I'm dividing by negative 64. Now I've got b all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 256 divided by 64 is 4, And since they do have different signs, we get a -4 as our final answer. Here is number 12. Always remind yourself of those steps. Don't call me. After midnight. D stands for distribute. So we will take the 4 and we will multiply it times both parts inside the parentheses. So 4 times 5 is 20. And 4 times 7 is 28. So we will write 28m. Copy down our equal sign and our -148. So now we see addition and we see multiplication. We know to undo addition before we undo multiplication. So to cancel out this addition, I should subtract -20 here and -20 here. Now I've got 28m all by itself on the left side, and then on the right side, we have -148 minus 20. I can change this subtraction problem into addition by saying keep, change, change. I will keep the -148, change from a minus to a plus, and change from a +20 to a -20. I see that they have the same signs, so I add the numbers together. 148 plus 20 gives us 168. And our higher absolute value is negative, so it will be a -168. Our very last step is to divide. We see a number right next to a letter that meant multiplication, so I'm going to divide both sides by 28. So now I've got m all by itself, and then 168 divided by 28 gives us a final answer of 6. We see that they have different signs, so we do get a -6 for our final answer. Here is our last page of problems. So we'll think through the phrase again, don't call me after midnight. And we know that the D stands for distribute. So we're taking this 8 that's on the outside of our parentheses and we're multiplying it times both pieces inside the parentheses. 8 times 8 is 64, so we'll write 64V. 8 times -7 is -56. Then we'll copy down everything around it. So I do see a -4. And then I also see my equal sign and 132. So I have just distributed. Next, I need to check if I can combine like terms. So remember, to combine like terms, we look on the left side and see if there's anything that looks alike. And then we look on the right side of the equal sign and see if there's anything that looks alike. This time, I do see a couple regular integers on the right side of our problem. I see -56 and I see -4. I can combine those together. So if we think about -56 minus 4, we could say keep, change, change, and turn it into -56 plus, instead of a +4, a -4. So now we see that we are adding integers that have the same signs, so we can add the numbers together. 56 plus 4 gives us 60. And if I go to the higher absolute value, I see that it was negative, so I should have a -60. So those combine together to get -60. Now I can just copy down everything next to it. We've got 64V, we've got an equal sign, and we have 132. So now I'm down to a two-step equation. I see multiplication and I see subtraction. I know that we undo addition and subtraction before we undo multiplication and division. So I'm going to cancel out this subtraction by adding 60 to both sides. Now on the left side, 132 plus 60 is 192. And on the right side, I still have my 64v. Here's our last step. We see that we've got multiplication, so we're going to do the opposite to both sides, and we're going to divide by 64. Now I've got v all by itself on the right side, and on the left side, 192 divided by 64 is 3. So v is equal to 3. Here is number 14. Always think through your steps. Don't call me after midnight. D means to distribute. So we will take our -4 and multiply it times both pieces inside the parentheses. -4 times 2 is -8. And then I'm doing -4 times -6. So multiplying 4 times 6 is 24. And since they do have the same signs, we get a positive 24. Now I can copy down the rest of the problem. I see subtraction and I see multiplication. So it's just like a two-step equation. We know to cancel out subtraction before we can cancel out multiplication. Canceling subtraction, we can add 8 to both sides. So on the right side, I will still have my 24x. And on the left side, I need to figure out -152 plus 8. They have different signs, so we should subtract the numbers. 152 minus 8 gives us, 144. So since our higher absolute value is negative, we do get a -144. If your instructor allows, you are welcome to use a calculator. Some of these numbers are getting big, and I had some trouble doing that one in my head. But it is -144, and our very last step is to divide. We see multiplication over here. It was saying 24 times x was what was left over. So I need to do the opposite. I'm going to divide both sides by 24. Now I've got x all by itself on the right side, and on the left side, 144 divided by 24 is 6. And since they have different signs, we do get another -6 as our final answer. Let's try out number 15. Think through all of your steps. Don't call me after midnight. To remember the order, we know that the D reminds us to distribute. So we will distribute our 4 times both pieces inside the parentheses. 4 times 7 is 28, so we can write 28p. 4 times 3 is 12. We copy down the rest of the problem, so our equal sign and our 180. We see a two-step equation. We want to cancel out this addition before we cancel out this multiplication. So I'm going to cancel the addition by subtracting 12 from both sides. Now I've got 28p by itself on the left side, and then on the right side, I've got 168. 180 minus 12 gave me 168. So now I'm down to my very last step. I see multiplication, so I need to do the opposite, and I need to divide both sides by 28. So we have seen a similar problem already. We've got P all by itself on the left side now, and on the right side, 168 divided by 28 gives us a final answer of 6. Here is our very last problem. We see lots of steps in there, but we know that we can use our phrase to help us to remember what to do. Every problem, we'll check for distributing first, and in this problem, we do see that we should distribute. We're going to do 6 times negative 7, and then we'll do 6 times 5. 6 times negative 7 gives us negative 42. 6 times 5 is 30, so we will write 30 in. I'm going to copy down everything next to it, so plus 4 equals 112. I have just distributed, so next up I need to combine like terms. Looking on the left side of the equal sign, I do see two pieces that we can combine. We can combine negative 42 and our positive 4. Those look alike because they're just regular numbers. So I'm thinking about negative 42 plus 4, and they have different signs, so I'm going to subtract the numbers. 42 minus 4 gives us 38, and our higher absolute value is negative, so we do get a negative 38. So now I'm going to write negative 38 plus 30n equals 112. We have 2 steps left. This is like subtraction, and this part is multiplication. So I know that I should undo my subtraction before I undo multiplication. I'm going to cancel my subtraction by adding 38 to both sides of the equal sign. Now I've got 30n all by itself on the left side, and on the right side, 112 plus 38 gives us 150. The very last step to solve for n is to divide. We're dividing both sides by 30. Now I've got n all by itself on the left, and on the right, 150 divided by 30 gives us 5. So I hope this video helped you out a lot. As always, you are welcome to ask me any questions, or you're welcome to ask your instructor. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day.